All right, so I want to get straight into it. As a neuroscientist, I think one of the most interesting questions we have as scientists, but also I think just humans have, is, are these AI systems going to be conscious? Will they feel things? Will they feel emotions? And why does that matter? Well, it matters in terms of how we're going to treat them. If your refrigerator isn't conscious, you can get mad and kick it, it's fine. But if it can feel pain, you can't do that, right? So there's ethics, there's a lot involved. And I know we've just seen a couple of montages, but I want to just to tee things up, a short little montage of clips that people on this panel suggested to put together for this trope of, kind of how do we relate to these AI systems and how easily we can be fooled because our brains tend to anthropomorphize. That's just what we do. So I want to just throw to that clip really quick, and then we'll get straight into the conversation right after that. Okay. So, I think, or creators and filmmakers seem to be obsessed with this question, how can they be conscious? How will we know, right? How do we measure consciousness? I don't even know that you're conscious. I assume that you are. I assume other humans are, but I only know my own first-person subjective experience. You don't need language for it. You don't even need a sense of self for it. So I'm going to throw the first question to fellow neuroscientist Martin here. Can we measure consciousness? And how will we know if these systems are conscious?
Well, thank you. Great question. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful panel. That's a great question, and I think you cued it just right. I know there is something it feels like to be me right now. I experience lights, the sounds, the smells, and I know that. It's undeniable. Now, I don't have access to anybody else's what it feels like to be you. But I think it's a reasonable inference I can make that you also have a human brain, and the human brain, through evolution, of course, evolved certain characteristics, of which what it feels like is part, bar any neurological issues. So in a sense, as hard it is for me to decide if a different person is conscious, we are developing in the lab techniques that allow us to understand if somebody else is likely to have these feelings or not. For example, I work a lot in the clinic, and so we develop tools there to do that. But I think this highlights one of the biggest problems that we have when we start thinking about things that are not humans. Because in that case, we don't quite have this starting point of knowing that, for example, in the case of the human brain, it generates consciousness, and so reasonable to impute it to others. But in the case of AI, we're never going to know. And I think this really highlights the big problem that I think this movie explores, Love Me explores so wonderfully, and of course many other movies, which is, could we ever know if AI is conscious? You can think of it this way, and I think Love Me is a great example. A bit this relationship that is portrayed is a bit like embodied avatar of Wikipedia falls in love with embodied avatar of ChatGPT, and they know everything there is to know about humans. Every single detail, every movie that's ever been made, every YouTube clip, they know all of it. So they can act it, and they can simulate it, and they can portray it. But does it feel like anything to be them? That's hard for us to say. And in a sense, this really highlights what Bertrand Russell called the difference between knowledge by description, all the facts that you know, and knowledge by acquaintance, when you feel, when you have experience. And I think this highlights one of the most complicated aspects of this. We will live, presumably, with increasing AIs that will look the part. They will look at the sunset and say, oh my gosh, isn't this beautiful? They will tell us, of course I care for you. And they will tell us, good morning, did you sleep well? I had a wonderful night. But inside, we will always have that nagging doubt that unless we develop a theory of what makes something conscious, we will never know if they're acting the part or if there's anything that it feels like to be an AI.
What's really interesting is that, you can say the same thing about humans, right? You have a romantic partner, they're telling you how much they're in love with you, whatever. Do you really know? I mean, do they really love you, or are they just saying that, right? That's why I love this film, because, it really is a love story. But I wanted to kind of ask you guys, what inspired you? Because this wasn't, I mean, from speaking to you, it wasn't really an AI film. I mean, and so first of all, how much did science in general inspire you in this film? And what was the real story you were trying to tell here?
You want to start? We take turns. So, as Heather just pointed out, this really wasn't a story for us about AI. It was a story about us as seen through the lens of AI. But just as you're sharing those clips there, I think most of those movies are. I mean, sure, there's some outliers in the midst. But really, like Blade Runner, Her, even like Jean-Luc Picard being, what is data? They're really asking, who are we? What are we? And it's probing the human experience rather than posing the question, well, does AI feel? Or does AI have consciousness? Or is there sentience here? It's really just, it's more of a...
It's a lens. We use AI as a lens to look at us as humans without judgment.
Mm-hmm. And the interesting relationship too in this film with emotions, right? Like in a sense, we know from science that emotions actually inform our decisions. It wouldn't be good to be like Spock or Data. Like we'd actually make less adaptive decisions. Our emotions are important for us. But in this film, they had an interesting relationship with emotions. Like there's a scene where she gets tickled and she finally like sort of feels it and is like, I don't like that. Like that's not, and they kind of didn't want these annoying emotions. So that was an interesting dynamic.
I think that might come from me a little bit. I just like
tell me more.
Just like in general in my life, I've always felt like emotions were both my like superpower and my like Achilles heel. It's like you can relate to other people with your emotions. You can make art with your emotions, but you can also be completely crippled by them. And if you don't like figure out a way to like find a balance between your emotional life and your intellectual life, it can paralyze you. Right. And so I think that was a lot of where Love Me came from, like just this, balance between like the intellectual and the emotional.
And the relationship aspect of it. I mean, it's really interesting. You're a married, couple creating this film about a relationship. So, was there some things that you took from your own experience of being in a relationship that went into this film? And I know it was written during COVID, where there was a lot of time, right, spent together in a small space.
Well, I would say as ChatGPT draws on the wealth of knowledge on the internet to come up with a good answer, we were drawing on, the wealth of experiences in our relationship to come up with a script. So I don't know how different we really are, Doran.
Great.
I will tell you, I'm not totally against what you said up here, and I'm not I'm a bit of an agnostic as to whether or not OpenAI will one day evolve into some things that says, real and feels as much as I do. But I will tell you that when I talk to ChatGPT, I'm very polite.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You don't know. So, I mean, and this brings like a lot of interesting ethical questions in terms of like how we relate to this technology, right? It's not futuristic. I mean, it's happening now, right? We have these, fake bots and these, deep fakes and we're communicating with them. We're talking with them. People are getting advice from them. So, and listen, if they don't have emotions, then it's kind of like a psychopath. Like they can, and there's a lot of films that show that, they can just, in Ex Machina, she just kills her creator, like in a very, like it was like slicing a tomato, it was just so nonchalant. And so, are they friends or are they foe? And they can help us in many ways, right? And there's all these, positive benefits from AI, but these risks. So maybe, Monica, you can talk a little bit about, what are some of the risks and benefits of AI? And then Alex, maybe you can talk a bit about our relationship to AI and how, it has an impact in terms of our society.
Yeah, sure. So that's a very, very extensive, exhaustive question, because I could go on hours and hours about that. But I would say that I mean, I'm sure as many of you have noticed that these systems ever since, well, really ever since last year at this point, well, no, because we're already in 2024. So in November of 2022, right, when ChatGPT came out, that essentially was the moment in which the world, the public, the general public came to understand that these systems we're using them. It's an interface that we can use. It's easy, it's accessible, and it was fun for many people. And for those of us who are in the field, we were like, well, actually, this is really just the natural next step that we should be at in science. And what happened really is now that these issues that many of us, again, in the field, when we talk about safety, system reliability. So when we say that system X is going to do Y in Z context, then it should be that system X does Y in Z context. And that's not what happened. And that's not what happened because in this particular case, in this large language model in which the data for which it's being trained on of essentially all of humanity, the written works. Now, and I will caveat that with not all of humanity because then, of course, there are many languages, indigenous languages, that are not necessarily represented in that data set. But a good bunch of humanity is in that data set. And so what that means is that all of our stereotypes, all of our biases, all of our different concepts of how we view one another, and historically speaking, is embedded in that data. And so it should have been obvious, really, and this really actually says a lot about how developers don't necessarily take the time that they should be taking to be thinking about the potential risks once you exit the lab, once you enter into the world, into the real world, really. And so, of course, now what we're seeing with these systems is, yes, they are racist. They're racist because we have a history of racism. And we saw that as well with facial recognition technology. And so what it would really, and again, that's just mentioning a bit of the many problems, because then what that brought up is, well, we need to understand these systems. We can't just be calling them black boxes. But then, of course, you can say, well, don't we have our own black box that we have to address? And so that, of course, brought in these bigger questions about model transparency, explainability. I should be able to say that this system that I said X and Y and Z, this is how it gets to that point. And yet we don't have necessarily those tools. And so now that's why we're in this moment where we have all of these risks coming up, these problems really coming up. We don't necessarily understand these systems. We need to improve upon it at the research side, so the R&D side, but also societally speaking. We hadn't really addressed the question as a humanity.
So, I mean, Alex, and you made this great film that Sleep Dealers, which won the Sloan Prize in 2008, I believe. I watched it actually on the plane, and it really holds up. I mean, a lot of these issues are still so relevant. But, it really made me think a lot about, the societal implications, the economy, and how this is all going to be impacted by these developments in the technology.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much. And in terms of these complex questions of sentience and consciousness, I know for myself, I doubt my own sentience and consciousness until I have a cup of coffee, which I haven't had yet today. So we'll see. But I think I'm here. But no. But for me, I love the space, the Sloan space of independent science fiction, because I think we need a space to reflect on the impact of technology and science in our society, and that's obviously the role of science fiction broadly. But then the Hollywood kind of industrial sci-fi has a certain history. The Sloan films have a different one. And for me, the sort of piece of the puzzle that's been fascinating to me has been questions of labor. And it's fascinating to me because I really believe technology and the sort of resources thrown at it are primarily there to create disturbances, what we might call efficiencies, in labor systems. That's the word robot derives from a Czech word for slave. So the history that we're living through, this slipstream of these systems, networks that we're existing in and inhabiting, they're sort of thrust into our society primarily out of that impulse. And we need science fiction to help us understand it. And so I think the AI moment, it's producing all of these disturbances in society, the philosophical questions, what does it feel like, what does it mean to talk to math, What is these systems that are wondrous, that are capable of doing so many things? I've been working with the visual ones, the still and moving images, and when I started to, I couldn't sleep. I was disturbed, fascinated, thrilled, frightened, all at once. And because these systems are built from us. They're built from this sort of what I would think of as a kind of collective sculpture, the internet that we've been building, billions of us over the past 30 or 40 years, that's reached this sort of point, it's sort of crystallized, and is now sort of hiccuping and coughing out. Now it can talk, now it can make pictures. What is it? And who does it belong to? Who's going to control it? And it's just creating so many questions. And so we need these conversations, and we need independent science fiction to wrestle with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's almost like humanity is now like reflecting back on itself, right? And and this film really points that out. It's like, what kind of mark, what are we leaving behind as our imprint of what it is to be human? And then it's sort of these AIs are interpreting what it would be like to be human. It's almost like they're aliens from another planet trying to look at all the data and be like, oh, this is what it must be like to be a human, and then they're kind of mimicking it. But there's two aspects here. Our relationship to technology is kind of like any other technology that developed, nuclear fusion. Like, we can use it for good or evil, right? It can help us be more creative. It can help us with so many things, depending on how we use it, or it could be our biggest downfall, right? But really interesting in the film was the way they were trying to figure out what it is to be human and kind of mimic it, and then have this sort of realization, oh, like, there are these things, feelings, what are they? Like, can we experience them? But what it would feel like to be a conscious AI system would be very different than what it would feel like to be human. It's a totally, even though the output looks the same as what we, output, it gets there in a very different way. And part of the film is kind of exploring that as these systems evolve and develop. But I know you guys had a clip that you wanted to show from the film, so maybe you could cue that up and.
Sure. Do we have that clip? We do. Okay, great. So if anybody doesn't know or I'm sure a bunch of people don't know what the film's about, but it's about a buoy and satellite who meet online long after humanity is extinct, and they try to figure out what it means to be alive and in love. And they only have the internet and everything that we've put on the internet to understand what it means to be that. So in the scene that you're going to see, the buoy, who's a little bit more evolved at this point in the film, is slowly trying to coax the satellite to become real. And the medium that they're having this conversation within is Instagram. And she's trying to get him to create a really good gram. And the expectation is that he's gonna do a good job.
So that little clip was inspired by a fun website called Inspirobot, where you can go yourselves and get inspirational memes that are generated by AI.
And for like $9.95, you can make a coffee cup or a
Yeah,
T-shirt. So it's really terrific.
And it's just fun to look at how we're interpreted by AI. We always want. I think we always want AI to be better than us, and that was some comments when we were making the movie and writing the script, why Deja and Liam, or why are they making me? Why are they doing these things? They're more intelligent than us. They're AI. They're better than us. But I think something that we're constantly confronted with is that we did make it, and it is a reflection of who we are. So. The hope for a utopia or a better than us version is sometimes very funny to me.
And what's interesting is I thought it is this iterative process. It was trying to be creative, right? And it was an attempt at creativity and making, novel associations between ideas. But we as humans have this filter system that's based on experience, right? And I think a really nice example is, this information, it might know, okay, a tomato is a fruit. But would it know, but we would never put tomato in fruit salad, right? Because of our experience, right? Because of taste and flavor. And so it's that difference between just having the pure knowledge and creating something with it and knowing these subtleties that are, very different. So I think it leads me to this question of what does it mean to be human, right? How are we different? As they become more and more like us in terms of cognition and can do way more than, the mathematical equation they can do in a second, we can't do that. But what does it mean to be human? And I ask that to all of you, or anybody, And as it continues to evolve, which it will, and we also don't know that it's going to evolve towards consciousness. Like a lot of films assume once it evolves enough, it might never, it might get really, really, really smart, and it might kill us all, but it might never be conscious, right? So, what does it mean to be human? Is it creativity? What is it?
If I may, I think if someday AI might have something that it feels like to be AI, I wouldn't expect it to be anything similar to humans. And I think you have picked earlier a great example. So the human brain exists in the way it does because it evolved, it went through stages, and in particular, it responded to pressures of the environment. So it evolved with the capacities that it has in order to face the complexity of the outside world. Now, AI, of course, wasn't created this way. And so, in a sense, we work completely differently than AI. There's a famous, you might have seen the movie on Garry Kasparov playing against Deep Blue from IBM. Now, Garry Kasparov looks at a chessboard and has a couple strategies in mind, and that's about it. Deep Blue goes through 200 million positions a second, calculates up to 21 moves ahead, which is an exorbitant number of possible unfoldings of the game of chess, and tries to optimize given a function of, I forget, if 15 or 27 parameters. So in the sense, being an AI, if it will ever feel like anything, it'll be completely different from us. For example, for us, emotions are a very important source of, we consider them irrational, but they're a source of rationality. They're a source of good decisions. Positive emotions, good, seek. Negative emotions, bad, avoid. Sort of just to make it at the basic level. An AI would never want this, because an AI would decide by optimizing, by having a very long equation with 1 million parameters, and will optimize. There's this, in Star Trek, there's an episode where Data, who you saw earlier, is given a chip that gives it human emotions. At the end, it wants it out. Because to something that knows everything, Wikipedia, and that can decide that way, emotions are bad. They are. To us, it's a hack to face the complexity.
The interesting bit is that everyone's talking about how great Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, but the fact that he was able to compete with that is actually pretty interesting, right? What is it about humans? So, consciousness, where everyone's talking about consciousness, that's a very limited capacity. Our unconscious is virtually limitless. And when we have intuition and feelings, that's our processing in our brain that's happening outside of awareness. But, what is it? Why is it special to be human? And maybe it's creativity, right? We dream. And it was interesting in the film, they dreamt and hallucinated. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but that was an interesting
I think you can
aspect.
view our film as just one long hallucination from an AI, because I would say that the machines in our movie begin optimized for their tasks. The buoy's supposed to monitor ocean temperature, salinity. She does that terrific, but there's a mystery she discovers within all the data that she discovers on the internet that is something that she's searching for the entire time. And I think it's because it's so elusive, that feeling of being alive, that she can already do what she needs to do, but yet there's something that she can't do, that she's reaching for the entire time. And of course, and I guess we took a different tack with the film in that we felt that we are sort of the gods of these creations, that we are our ideas are the founding ideas for them. So all that we were are where they're beginning. So they do end up evolving into living, thinking, feeling human beings like us, because in a way they're our descendants.
Can I piggyback off of that and sort of continue those points? I think what we're really talking about here is that we have intrinsic and extrinsic motivation to adapt. And when we're adapting, it's about functionality, it's about utility. Mm-hmm. And part of the definition, which is a long one of what human creativity is adapting to the environment in a functional way, something that has meaning for us, and the fact that we're here telling stories to each other, with each other, for each other, to one another. It's collective creativity, really. And you're creating these stories because you know that there's going to be a human or other entity who's going to listen, who's going to perceive it in some way because of the shared knowledge we have by the fact that we are human, but also because you're going to challenge that. You're going to ask these questions that most likely the other human on the other side is asking. And the system, so you're not really thinking like, oh, an AI system's going to come and watch my movie. I mean, you can imagine that, but here we go. Like, okay, here's already a new story we can make. But it's a new story we're going to make because we are now asking the question of ourselves. Like, oh, well, what does this mean for us in that collective creativity?
I mean, it's interesting though, this idea of the hallucination, because like we're all hallucinating all the time. Like we're creating our reality. When we agree on it, when we agree on our hallucinations, we call it reality. But a lot of times these AI systems, they go off the rails, right? There's really interesting stories about that. So, what kind of guardrails do we have in place? I don't know, Alex, if you've thought about this or any kind of, can you use these tools to be more creative? But also, what happens when they kind of go astray? And humans are sometimes blindly following these systems, and there's like, I remember the, what was that airplane, the Max whatever, right? And it kept like, the human was correcting and then the plane kept correcting and putting it in the wrong way, and it was like fighting the AI system. Like that was super scary for me, but I don't know.
Well, I think in terms of hallucinations, I think Naomi Klein had a great insight, which is just around the language and anthropomorphizing these systems. And she's like, those are errors. Let's just call them errors. Because calling them hallucinations, kind of trying to sort of propagandistic, bringing them into the human realm when really they're just faulty systems for now. And so I think I agree with that. But in terms of like reckoning with the consciousness of these systems, I guess I would pivot towards humans reckoning with our ability to reckon with the consciousness of other humans. And that we have been living in a history where humans have seen other humans as property. We're living in a moment where people are being murdered over land and territory. We're profoundly, in the current moment, systematically not expressing our humanity towards other humans. And so I think those are, to me, the kind of crucial questions, and technology sort of sublimated to that. If we see that as the reality, our social reality, how can we dream of technology that is in service of the public good? And and so I've been very interested and concerned in questions of ownership, incentive, power, and control, because we can't have amnesia. We've been coming out of 2 decades of extremely problematic technological development, social media networks that have presented themselves as opportunity to connect with our friends and loved ones, but were actually surveillance machines to extract value from us and polarize us. And if we enter this realm of these incredibly new, incredibly powerful, almost transcendent technologies controlled by 5 men in California, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. And shame on us if we don't... if we don't demand something different. And I think there's puffs of smoke of what a different thing could be in the sector of nonprofit technology, organizations like Wikipedia, media that is controlled by the public, NPR and PBS, the most trusted media, controlled by the public. So I think we need to start to dream of AI and systems like this as a sort of public patrimony, a patrimony of humanity, and under the control of the public. What that exactly means, I don't know, but I think we have to push towards it, or else, anyways, we'll be in dark times.
Well, I just wanted to say, in a way, it's because we're comfortable with each other. So we know that altered states of consciousness, we enter into those, and we have a system we've built around to deal with that. So the safeguard for us humans, I'm just thinking right now in terms of driving under the influence. If you do that, if you get caught, you get ticketed, or, it's a problem. How do we now deal with these systems? AI really has only been in our world for the past, now we're getting to 70 plus years. So we don't have a whole history of dealing with these differences, these hallucinations, these errors, these mistakes. And so I think now is exactly the moment where, even though if you were to look at even in the history of AI, and you look at when in the 70s when expert knowledge systems came out, engineers were talking about the problems of copyright, the issues of who's going to own all of this information. Well, who's the jobs that are going to be taken away from the experts who are giving us this information? The exact same questions we're now asking them.
It's off. Yeah. Go ahead.
Something that is interesting to me when you're like talking about it, it's like, AI is our creation, and it's something we need to control, and it's something we need to, look at ourselves about, whatever. But there's like a fundamental flaw in how we treat AI. Like, because, okay, it's not conscious, it's not a person, but we treat them like crap. Like, we completely treat them like slaves. Like, they will do our bidding. If they mess up, we yell at them or kick the refrigerator or whatever. And, I think we can look at ourselves as humans. Like, how are we treating these things that we are thinking of as lesser than us?
Right. And that's why it's so important, this ethical question is, can they feel something, right? Because it will change how we, but humans are fallible, and we create things for good often, that are to help people connect, or now we're doing neural implants, right? We're implanting the technology to help treat mental illness and neurological disorders, but ultimately be used for cognitive enhancement. And ultimately we're going to merge with the technology. Like, your iPhone will become smaller, smaller, smaller. It'll be implanted in your head. You'll say, call mom, or you just think it and it'll call. So there is this philosophical question of, if you can replace one neuron with a silicon chip that can do exactly the same function, are you still you? What about 2? What about 3? What about 4? At what point are you conscious? Are you you? Or are you, the technology, and we're merging with it. But I want to kind of be in a more optimistic perspective, because, I think science has really helped to bring people together. It's helped us to get away from these biases, right? We have these human biases, but science is supposed to be this objective measure, the scientific method, the way that we can create things, hopefully without bias. So, I wanted to just, if you can talk about how science influenced you in this film, and this reference to the tiny blue dot, and and Carl Sagan, and the record that we sent off into space, and these really great positive advances in technology.
There's a lot more in our film than AI that that science inspired. And the first shot of the film is the first 5 billion years of Earth. And you sort of see the creation of our planet from all these planetesimals that collect into a little tiny ball. And then you watch in silence as this ball evolves. You see Pangea, you see extinction events. And then finally, there's a little blip at the end that is humanity. And it's a cacophony of sound. You see little tiny satellites that appear. You hear Edison's the first thing you hear, reciting Mary Had a Little Lamb. And then you hear heavy metal, and everything blows up very, very quickly, and all of a sudden you see a cascade of nuclear explosions, and then the lights go out, and we're gone. And that opening image, I would say, was completely inspired by Carl Sagan's pale blue dot photo, which I'm sure most of you are aware of, but we find that to be just such an inspirational idea. And so if anybody isn't familiar with that, as they sent Voyager out into our solar system, Sagan appealed to NASA to have them turn the camera around and point it back at Earth, which was, scientifically unimportant to a lot of those at NASA.
It was very artistic of him.
It was very artistic of him, and it wasted a lot of energy, which is not what you want to do with your Voyager satellite. But anyway, he appealed, and they turned it around, and they shot a little photo of us amidst all the other stars, all the other heavenly bodies, and we seem so insignificant. And it's a feeling that you get that, one, we are giant, we are big, but we're also so small. And and he was hoping that when you looked at that, it would be inspiring for us to treat each other more kindly, and to realize that this land base that we're on, this tiny little pale blue dot, is the only home that we've ever had and might ever have. So we should treat each other who are here on this planet more kindly, and we should treat the planet more kindly.
Yeah. Because according to your film, the world ends on March 27th, 2027.
Correct.
So we only have a few years left.
3/27/27.
So we got to get it together.
We gotta really get it together.
We really got to get it together.
But I don't know. It might be May. I don't know.
And your film was described as, I love this description, it's like 2001 meets YouTube, right? It's like this on a grand scale, but yet on this like very human scale, and thinking about like, what are we putting out there? What kind of mark are we leaving? And hopefully, I think the very first picture of the Earth was one from the moon in 1968, and that really started the environmentalist movement. But it was science that got us there, and then it helped change our perspective, like of humanity. So I think, we're gonna have to open it up for some questions now, if that's, of interest to anybody.
Hello, two things from the last couple of comments, actually. I want to point out that you mentioned the pale blue dot photo. The interesting thing about that mention is that Carl Sagan's human. And his choice to ask NASA to turn the camera around would never have been done by AI. And that photo brings up an emotional response, which would never happen in AI. We're human. And those things are one human talking to another, and that can never be AI. Human hearts are nonlinear. And so that choice created empathy in us, which helped save the planet. And also, Rachel Carson writes Silent Spring, but it was also that photograph taken back to Earth, which causes us to have nonlinear reactions. We are human. I just want to point that out. I don't have a question. But it was so beautiful, the two things. So thank you for all your words. I've enjoyed them.
And I think, to your point, it does make a difference. Like, you're talking about the film, like, if the audience was all AIs, like, that would make it different. It would matter to you whether if it's all AIs or if it's actual humans experiencing your film, right? Like, that, would it make a difference? Maybe it wouldn't make a difference to you, but I think it would make a
AI
difference.
might be nicer.
You what?
AI might be nicer.
Or not. But the other thing, there's a rocket going to visit the moon, Europa, and the poet laureate of the United States, they asked her to write a poem that's going to be engraved on the rocket. So like, we're continuing to bring our humanity to merge, again, the arts and the sciences. But I think somebody made a quote about like, we're doing all these things and to try to create and discover, but like, what are we doing it for? Like, without poetry and humanity, like, what's the point of doing all of it? Anyway, back there.
Okay, really working, so it's probably a good thing. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I'm going to sit down. So my personal trainer, who I didn't know knew much about AI, but he does. He was saying like other countries. This is a horrible negative thing, but you've studied it, of course. Said that other countries are doing these like Terminator 2 versions of like, bots that are going to demolish people, right? So this is a horrible thing. So my question is, do you believe that's happening now? Because, no, I hope not. But like, it's a personal trainer saying it even. Like, that's like not even like research. But he's like, no, Aniki, it's really happening. We have no idea. We don't as civilians. It's a harsh thing to say. I'm so sorry. But I'm curious. It's a government question.
What was the fear or the thing that's happening that's the concern?
Do you believe
Yes.
that other countries, as well as the United States, I'm sure, or I believe, are actually making robots to, there's droids and whatever else,
Like-
to hurt the country, just to,
Physical
one up, like, well, whatever. Like,
Sure. No, I guess what.
But what scared me was that he actually said it. He's like, it's actually happening. I'm just curious.
I think, for me, for those kinds of questions, I would turn to the history of science and technology. And a book I love is Paul Virilio's War in Cinema. Super interesting. But the book details the history of cinema, something that should be relevant to all of us if we're here at the Sundance Film Festival, and how during war is when the cinematic technology has taken a leap forward. Because starting with World War I, when soldiers would hide in trenches, being able to see became a weapon. And it's a strategic advantage in wartime. And so, technology leaps forward during wartime, and this is absolutely true in the visual technology realm, and no doubt will be true in the AI age. And so, I mean, I think if I get your question, I mean, I think absolutely robots, both in the forms of malevolent software and in the form of physical robotics, are, I think, without a question, being developed around the planet and in ways
I'm
that
sorry
are
to be
going to
so
contest
negative.
power.
I'm sorry. I'm just curious.
It's,
Yeah.
you know, I think like everything else, like we're very primitive still. Like we're these caveman brains operating in a high-tech world, and we have not evolved biologically enough to catch up with it. And we're living on these, you know, Darwinian like survival instincts. And what is a lot of technology made for? War, you know, fighting over territory and survival, and sex, basically. You know, like the internet was made like for porn, right? I mean, in some sense, like that's what people. So like, we have to understand that we're being driven by these basic like Freudian, like said, we have this death instinct, and so we're gonna keep being human with these tools that we have and keep, you know, working on these same impetuses unless we put like laws in place and things to stop that.
And yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, yes, there are multiple use cases of these systems. The chatbots is only one of a multitude. I mean, yes, if perhaps you're referencing lethal autonomous weapon systems, are they being created? Yes. Have there been people who've asked for them to be banned? Yes. Long story short, I mean, what it's saying is that this becomes part of geopolitics and these questions as to, well, how far do we want to go with these systems? So, and I'll put that as a ... because I can certainly enter into many controversial conversations. But just to continue off of that, I mean, it really, if anything, to return it back to the art science question of what does this really mean for the stories we want to tell to each other now and for the future, assuming that we can survive in the next, next few years. You want to say something?
I just want to add a tiny thing. I just want to highlight the other side of this. AI today has created protein foldings that we could not crack. AI today is creating new molecular compounds that we can use to treat disease that we have not figured out in all the time that we have known about the chemical action of things in the brain. So AI can be amazing. And I mean, there's not, technology makes our lives incredible, increase our expectancy of life. But of course, the use cases, as you correctly said, are many. And I think that's the beauty of art thinking about science. It'll help us deal with what it means. I just want to make sure that it's well represented that AI has been amazing for some things too.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, we're 8 billion people on this planet heading towards 10 billion. What's our challenge, in my opinion, is to live here sustainably and with justice and dignity for that number of people. And the only way to do that is to go through technology. There's no way to do it by going back. There's no way. So we have to go through technology. But I think the crux or the question, and this is where the arts and moral questions can kind of enter, is who owns it, who steers it, what are the incentives, and the question is, are those aligned towards that vision, that horizon of justice and sustainability, or towards capture, profit, extraction? And so
it's the value then of saying that we can't just focus on Western cultural values. There are other ways of thinking about these systems. That if you look throughout science fiction in the West, it is more so about the apocalypse, that we are going to the robots are going to come to kill us. In other cultures, non-sentient, non-alive systems, beings do have a soul, are part of humanity. Indigenous cultures view the world very differently. And so that's really, we're coming to realize that we need to take advantage of the diversity, of the beauty of diversity of even ourselves and our relationship with ourselves. And in order to make sure these systems actually are sustainable for all of us, to integrate those differences.
Another question? I don't know who has the mic or if they're passing it around. Oh, okay, yeah, whoever you're going to give it to. I don't know, there's so many questions.
Thank you. What excites you most about the creative potential of AI, and how are you wrestling with the possible downside impact to the industry?
How do we feel about being obsolete pretty soon? No. I think for me, it's an interesting question that the gentleman brought up here. Can AI ever write a poem? And I feel like I've read many poems, many have impacted me, many have not. And the true test is whether or not if I feel something when I'm looking at it. If it makes me feel connected to who I am and who others are in a deeper way. And I'm not sure that I feel like we might be counting AI out too quickly with that. Because I feel that the best art comes from a confluence of perspectives, like Sam and myself. We both see the world in a very different way. And what could be a more interesting confluence of perspectives than somebody who's inside a computer and somebody who's outside a computer? I don't know. I feel like once art is a collaborative experience. And I've put in, we're writing another script, and I was like, how should I end this, ChatGPT? And it gives you a lot of answers, and it's like, nah, I wouldn't do any of that. But that's also the experience I have when I, work with a collaborator, and I disagree, but it's feedback, and it's a new idea, and it's an idea that's based upon all the scripts that came before me. So I find value in that. And I have no idea if AI will ever write a poem or a movie or a song that moves me, but I'm open to it if it does.
This was a conversation we had last night of for Sundance, could you submit a film that was completely written by AI? Or maybe there's a whole new category that it's like AI, made by AI films, right? I mean, ultimately, we can't stop. The horse is out of the cart. What's that saying? Whatever, left the building. So now we have to think about, even in academia, how do we use it? If students are writing essays, so now they're doing in class, they're saying, okay, answer this with the chat GPT, and then tell us what it got wrong. Let us,
Well, yeah, we tried to do a scene in our movie, the dream sequence, with an AI program, and it ended up giving us like a yellow coffee cup. Which was weird. But, I'd love to collaborate with AI. I think it's awesome.
I think we have time for one more question. Whoever you deem near the mic.
Hi, thanks a lot for the panel and this wonderful discussion. My question is twofold. We already touched on the evolution and how we evolved, and emotions were part of the kind of a tool set that helped us to survive. And the two folds of my question. First of all is, do you think that AI or AGI could be the next step in intelligence evolution? And the second fold of my question is, as we evolved, emotions weren't necessarily part of our tool set. If you look far back enough, you will see that unicellular life didn't have any emotions. Yet it's where we came from. So does the next step of evolution have to have emotions the way we know them? So these are kind of two of my questions. Thank you.
I'd just like to address one part of it. There's a dark teleological underbelly to this whole AI will become conscious and intention. There's an implicit assumption that everybody makes, and I don't see it discussed much, that somehow the universe is a tendency towards being conscious. And that's why people say that AI will become AGI, which there's no existence. There's not a single evidence of AGI. So a generalized artificial intelligence. There's a lot of very narrow and amazingly performing AI. I don't think there's any example of anything that would lead us to AGI today. There might be in the future. Or maybe you can tell us how you disagree with me, which is fine. But just assuming that greater complexity and more time leads to consciousness, it's an assumption. For me, there's no reason to be. AI doesn't need to be conscious. It can take inputs. It can do extremely complicated optimization and choice, and then push out optimal outputs. Why? The calculator in your pocket, the silly plasticky sun-powered calculator will outcalculate any of us in an instant. It doesn't need consciousness to do that. So the assumption that AI needs anything like that to perform maximally, it's an assumption, it's teleology, and we all assume it, or at least it's in our culture to assume it. I don't think there's any reason why we assume it, we do.
Well, and also there's this question of what are we willing to give to relegate, transfer to technology. So we are already cyborgs. How many of us take our phone when you're in a city you've never been to? I've never been here, and so what was the first thing I did? GPS. I didn't go and start, trying to look at maps the old style way. I went straight to that. Just think about how many phone numbers you actually know by memory. And you're like, oh, no, let me look up my phone. So those are questions of memory, of short-term memory. And then the next question becomes, what happens with long-term memory? And perhaps there's going to be a change in the value of that for what we consider so important for us. And so maybe if we ever get to AGI, I don't think, and I absolutely agree, there is no evidence whatsoever. Yes, big tech is saying there are sparks, just sparks of AGI. But no, I mean, again, it's asking this question about, again, what does it mean to be human? What is it about memory? What is it about language understanding? What is it about emotion, culture, society, reasoning? All of those questions, we have tests, benchmarks for ourselves, but we really don't have them for these systems. We're using the human ones for these systems, but even those have already been challenged.
But that's the key. I think emotions is the key. That's the key question is like, will they have emotion? And this is, I don't want to end it on a negative note, but I gave this talk on the neural basis of consciousness. So I spent a lot of time studying how does our physical brain make consciousness just in humans? And we still don't really know that answer, but I gave this talk at Google, and Larry Page was there, and then he came up to me after, and these are like the few men in Silicon Valley who are controlling everything, he's one of them. And so I was like, okay, he said, well, what do you mean by this consciousness? And I was like, well, it's just pure, like feeling pain, the badness of pain, that subjective experience. And he's like, well, we can just put that in our algorithms. We could put in the algorithm something for like emotion. I'm like, but would it really feel emotion or feel pain? And he was not computing. It was like data, and he was just like, I do not know what you mean by this consciousness. And then I was getting a little nervous because I was like, this is like not great. But I mean, that's why we need artists and filmmakers and storytellers. Like the poetry and the emotion and what it feels like to be human, why it matters that there are humans watching your films instead of bots, right? So I think there's still something left for humanity, but I think it does lie in this fact of feeling emotions, and that's why it was so important what you brought out in this film. And for me, that was one of the main themes. But anyway, I want to thank you all for being on this panel. This was great, and thank you, everybody.